The Pillow Book of Sei Shōnagon. The Pillow Book of Sei Shōnagon. This is a Folio Society edition of this book, which is, that is to say, the book itself is something like 1,000, 1,200 years old or something. It was written in the 10th century. Comes with it does not come with a beat up slipcover, but mine does. Mine's pretty beat up. I bought this used. It's pretty beaten up, I think is the proper way to say that. In any case, let's put this aside because, as I've said many times, when it has a slipcover, the slipcover gets beaten up and the book is pristine. Just look at that beautiful black with the gold lettering, which I do not speak or read Japanese. I assume it says something along the lines of the Pillow Book of Sei Shōnagon, but I don't really know. The issue with this book, it's got nice crisp white pages, except the top, which are what I believe Folio Society is calling lilac. The issue with this book is that the spine has faded. And that's what happens when you keep your books when they are exposed to light. The spines can fade, and I know some people keep their spines turned inward or otherwise try to block the light from touching the spine. I do try to keep direct sunlight away from my books, but other than that, I don't worry too much about it. And I let the spines fade as they will, even though in this case, I really don't think it looks very nice. The black to me looks so beautiful, and the faded bit doesn't. And now that's the part that, that sticks out from that's the part we actually see unless we're reading the book. As it happens, this book is kept like this in my wife's nightstand, so in a drawer, until she pulls it out and reads it, because she likes it. She likes to flip through it. And we're going to talk about the inside now, but in a second. That is, it's bound in this, what they call an artificial moire silk, which has a texture to it. Let's see if you can hear this. You hear that? So that's what if you can imagine that sound as you run your hand over it, that's what this feels like. I love it. Okay, it's got, again, what they call lilac colored end leaves. And how do I know all this? It doesn't actually say anything here about what it's bound in, but I looked it up in the Folio 60 bibliography, basically, book, which I've done a different video on. And it told me everything I needed about it. Okay, so this was translated by Ivan Morris with illustrations by Jasper Dean. The illustrations are, I'm not an expert in Japanese art, but they seem to me to be very appropriate. So, Sei Shōnagon, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, lived in the, I believe, the 10th century. And this is basically just a diary with a bunch of entries. And she was in pretty relatively high society. As you might expect, the illiterate masses were not keeping long diaries. Well, even if they weren't illiterate, they probably were illiterate, but even if they weren't, they just didn't have the time. But she has a lot of really interesting, almost fun kind of things, like top 10 lists that we would think of in a blog today or something like that. Not necessarily. She doesn't say, here are my top 10 lists, but she has a lot of lists. For instance, poetic subjects. These are poetic subjects. She has, there's so many different lists that we could really find them just by flipping through. But here's just one day a man from the office of, am I reading this right? One day a man from the office grounds brought me a packet wrapped in white paper and decorated with a magnificent branch of plum blossom. And then she talks about that. The entries are pretty short, generally, easy reading, and just kind of really cool. I mean, she wrote this so long ago, and so some of it is not, we can't really relate to. There are some notes in the back that help with that kind of relating to, but some of it you really can. It's just, it's kind of interesting how someone from separated so far in time, but also in culture, not just modern culture, but my own personal culture, that it's so interesting that we can have such a connection, that I can understand what she's saying and why she's, why she's thinking the way that she thinks. Now that I've told you about lists, I want to find a few more. So, things that make one's heart beat faster: sparrows feeding their young, to pass a place where babies are playing, to sleep in a room where some fine incense has been burnt, to notice that one's elegant Chinese mirror has become a little cloudy. Some of these things we can totally relate to, and some of them we really can't. We really don't know a lot about. Things that arouse a fond memory of the past: dried hollyhock, the objects used during the display of dolls. I don't know what she's talking about. But then some of it is. It is a rainy day and one is feeling bored. Yeah. To pass the time, one starts looking through some old papers, and then one comes across the letters of a man one used to love. You don't have to be Japanese, and you don't have to live in the 10th century to agree that finding old letters on a boring rainy day would make you think of the past. Things that people despise: the north side of a house. Okay, so she's, of course, in the northern hemisphere. The north side of the house is cold, doesn't face the sun. Someone with an excessive reputation for goodness. I love that. An old man who has lived to be too old. A frivolous woman. A mud wall that has started to crumble. Okay, that last one, can't really relate to too much. I get where she must be coming from. But that first one, I love that so much. Because don't we sometimes hate someone with an excessive reputation for goodness? Okay, so look, I think it's a very pretty book. The paper is pretty thick, relatively thick. Feels good in the hand. There's lots of big space for the margins here. And there are these illustrations throughout that, as I say, I think are appropriate and interesting. There you have it. They call it the pillow book. I mean, I don't think she called it her pillow book, but in any case, that's what it's called in modern day. The Pillow Book of Shōnagon. This is a Folio Society edition.